At the start of the movie, Edward Cullen, a vampire, starts taking off his clothes during the St. Salvator festival. His girlfriend Becca Crane tries to stop him as she rushes over. The Zolturi, a powerful vampire coven, becomes increasingly concerned as Edward prepares to reveal himself in front of humans. This could expose the existence of vampires. As Becca runs through a fountain, she accidentally splashes water. People mistake her gesture, thinking it's a party, and join her in the fountain. This sadly stops her from reaching her boyfriend. Enraged, Becca starts taking down each woman one by one with powerful moves. Finally breaking free, she shouts Edward's name. A crazy fan then jumps in her path and declares her love for Edward, only to be struck in the face with a shovel by a devoted Jacob fan. It's then revealed that Jacob is a werewolf and the arch-enemy of vampire Edward. A fight soon breaks out between the two sets of fans. In the meantime, as Edward is fully exposed, the Zolturi gives the signal to their associates to eliminate him. Witnessing this, Becca rushes to save him by executing an acrobatic stunt. However, she's caught off guard when one of the Zolturi members jumps at her with a single fang, startling her. The scene then shifts to where it all began. In a flashback, Becca moves to Sporks to live with her dad, Sheriff Frank, because her mom is having an affair with someone else. As they drive through the town, she senses something off about the place. Despite witnessing a vampire attacking a civilian, a dentist sign advertising for vampires, and a homeless vampire desperate for blood, she can't quite pinpoint what's wrong. Even her father, the sheriff, seems clueless about the town's oddities. Upon reaching home, Frank shows Becca her room, assuring her he's kept it just as she left it. The room still holds remnants of her childhood, including a crib, a dollhouse, a miniature dining table, dolls, and her pet hamster, which is now just bones. She firmly reminds him she's a teenager now, especially after he jokingly tries to put a pacifier in her mouth. Frank then proceeds to strap Becca into a baby harness and brings her downstairs to meet Jacob, a childhood friend. During their conversation, he reveals the changes his body has been undergoing since puberty hit. Meanwhile, there have been mysterious killings of random people, and the prime suspects are thought to be Canadians. However, it turns out to be a group of vampires, who are often mistaken for the Black-Eyed Peas. At one time, a fisherman is attacked by the group. One of the vampires asks if he knows who they are. The fisherman jokingly answers that they are the Black-Eyed Peas. However, not long after, he is killed mercilessly. The following day, at her new high school, Becca quickly makes friends with many students, which surprises her considering the less than warm welcome she received. Among them is Jennifer, but Becca finds herself intrigued by the mysterious and distant Edward Cullen. She finds his behavior rather strange. In biology class, he compares her scent to tuna. Despite this, Becca remains curious about him. Later, she has a close call when a van almost hits her in the school parking lot. Suddenly, Edward appears out of nowhere and stops the van by pushing another student in its path, resulting in serious injuries to that student. He refuses to explain his actions to Becca and warns her not to befriend him. Once back at home, Becca finds herself unable to stop thinking about Edward. Jacob rushes over to check on her, bringing flowers and balloons adorned with decorations of love. However, she acts oblivious to his advances and sadly dismisses him as a brother figure. Jacob then warns her to steer clear of Edward and quickly leaves the scene. Frank then informs his daughter that fisherman Scully has been found dead, drained of blood with bite marks on his neck. He concludes that this could only mean the presence of Kardashians in town. He then gives Becca pepper spray for protection against the potential killer. Later that night, Becca dreams of Edward in her room, wearing a bathrobe, curlers in his hair, and whitening strips on his teeth. He urges her to go back to sleep, but she reacts by farting on his face, causing him to fall out of the window. She wakes up to the sound of the crash, wondering if Edward was truly in her room. She then finds his business card on the floor. This only adds to her curiosity about who or what Edward Cullen really is. After doing some research, Becca confronts him, saying she knows what he is. However, she mistakenly believes he's one of the Jonas brothers. Edward contacts her, revealing that he's actually a vampire, but reassures her that he only drinks animal blood and watches The Real Housewives of Atlanta. But he admits that he finds it difficult to control himself when he's near Becca. Unlike others, he can't read her mind. Becca admits she likes him and wants to be with him. She thinks he's handsome, so he doesn't need to be smart. Hearing this, Edward smiles and asks if she'll go to prom with him, to which she happily agrees. That night, Becca becomes certain about 3 things. First, Edward is a vampire. Second, American Idol won't be the same without Simon. And third, when she next sees Edward, she won't be able to resist her desires. Out of nowhere, Edward appears in her room. He expresses his desire to try something and leans in to kiss her. He nervously giggles, admitting that he's never kissed anyone before. However, Becca wants more and starts to become aggressive. When she doesn't stop, Edward has to resort to smashing a vase over her head. Surprisingly, Becca is not injured by the impact. Edward explains that if they want to be together, they need to take things slowly. He assures her that she won't get hurt as long as he's with her. Suddenly, the dish antenna from the roof falls on Becca's head, along with concrete, bricks, sand, and other debris. Once the chaos settles, Edward reaffirms his promise to protect her from then on. The couple eventually falls deeply in love, and on Becca's 18th birthday, he introduces her to his vampire family. His mother, Eden, greets Becca warmly, but the cousins Alex and Rosalind don't seem very excited to meet her. However, Edward's sister Iris embraces Becca, declaring they will be best friends because she's seen it in her visions. Edward explains that some of them have special powers, and Iris can see the future. Meanwhile, Jeremiah, the newest member of the family, struggles to control his hunger for humans. When he sees Becca, he imagines her as a tempting cheeseburger, which only makes him feel hungrier. While opening her birthday gift, Becca accidentally gets a paper cut and begins to bleed. Jeremiah, unable to resist his hunger, lunges toward her with a fork and knife. Edward stops him just in time by pushing Becca away from him, but she sustains more injuries in the process, making all the vampires thirsty for her blood. Edward becomes frustrated, expressing that every time he brings a girlfriend home, his family tries to eat them. But this time, he's determined to prevent it. At that moment, a delivery boy arrives with food, giving Edward the chance to satisfy his family's hunger. He swiftly drags the guy inside and offers him to his family. Everyone starts feasting on the poor guy, while Edward takes Becca away on his hoverboard. Once they're at a safe distance, he feels remorseful about what happened and realizes he can't risk Becca's life again. She pleads with him to turn her into a vampire, but he refuses. Edward then sadly tells her they can't be together and makes her promise not to do anything reckless. Becca jokingly promises not to date Chris Brown. As Edward breaks up with her and leaves, Becca feels miserably abandoned. She desperately searches for him, calling out his name until she collapses in frustration. Shortly after, the 3 vampires who killed the fisherman suddenly appear. They begin to attack Becca, and she's now in grave danger of being eaten alive. In self-defense, Becca uses pepper spray, but accidentally sprays an innocent woman who has come to help her. Thankfully, Edward arrives just in time to save her. During the brawl, one of the vampires, Jack, stings Becca's arm with his fangs. This enrages Edward, so he kills the guy by knocking his head off with a baseball bat. Jack's head flies through Sheriff Frank's car window, and he once again mistakenly blames the Kardashians for the chaos. After Edward saves Becca by drinking the vampire blood from her veins, he bids her farewell and disappears into the woods. Sadly, his departure deeply hurts Becca, and she spends months feeling heartbroken. Everything reminds her of Edward, especially his perfectly styled hair held in place with a strong hairspray. Each night, she suffers nightmares that cause her to scream loudly. Her father Frank rushes to her room to comfort her, understanding that breakups are tough, especially when someone as handsome and charming as Edward ends the relationship. He gently suggests that Becca could work on improving her style and appearance before bidding her goodnight. The following day, Becca goes to the movies with Jennifer, where they watch Twilight Saga: Breaking Dawn. Jennifer comments on how lame it would be to date a vampire. As they leave the theater, she inadvertently spoils the movie by mentioning the main character's marriage and vampire baby, much to the disappointment of the people waiting in line. When they reach the parking lot, Jennifer leaves Becca alone, knowing they'll have to pass by some intimidating bikers. As Becca walks closer to the bikers, one of the big guys asks her to sit on his vehicle. She then sees a vision of Edward appearing and telling her to leave because these guys are dangerous. However, she doesn't listen to him and keeps walking. Then, the man who invited her throws his beer can at her head. That's when she understands how risky it is to be around these guys and remembers Edward warning her about them. Cut to the next scene. As Becca struggles with her emotions, she finds solace in her growing friendship with Jacob. One day, while she's in the woods, she's confronted by the last of the nomadic vampires. Just as things seem dire, Jacob arrives at the scene and undergoes a transformation into a Chihuahua. He reveals that it is his werewolf nature. The nomadic vampire is unfazed and makes fun of him, but Jacob's pack arrives just in time to rescue Becca from the dangerous vampire. Meanwhile, Edward has relocated to Rio de Janeiro and is dating Lady Gaga in an attempt to move on from Becca. One day, his sister Iris informs him of a troubling vision. In the vision, she saw Becca taking her own life. This revelation only sinks him into further despair. Determined to make a drastic move, Edward decides to provoke the Zolturi, the powerful vampire coven. He plans to expose himself to sunlight during St. Salvator's Day, forcing them to kill him for revealing the existence of vampires. As Edward prepares to execute his plan, Iris has another vision, this time foreseeing Becca's survival. Unfortunately, she's unable to warn Edward because he's already set out on his risky course of action. Iris then visits Becca in her Porsche 911. She urges her to save Edward by proving she's alive. Amidst this tense moment, Jacob arrives and pressures Becca to choose between him and Edward. However, just as she's about to announce her decision, Jacob gets distracted by a passing cat and dashes off to chase it. On St. Salvator's Day, Becca finds herself caught in the middle of the conflict between Edward's fangirls and Jacob's fangirls. Despite her efforts, she's unable to reach Edward before he takes the drastic step of exposing himself. Just then, the twilight falls, followed by a new moon and an eclipse. These change in events cause Edward's vampire nature to be concealed, allowing Becca to safely get him out of harm's way. However, a confrontation soon ensues between Edward and the Zolturi leader, Darrow. In order to save his life, Edward is forced to turn Becca into a vampire. However, he agrees to do so only if Becca agrees to marry him, a condition which she readily accepts. The film concludes with Edward being struck in the head by one of Jacob's fangirls. Surprisingly, he survives the blow, and Becca, now a vampire, retaliates by attacking the girl.